today. So good to see you. Welcome, 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 welcome. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Please hit the notifications bell. It's always a pleasure to engage with all of you. I'm here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment, and I'm ready to have a nice chat with all of you. It's great. It's really, really great. It is really, really great. A lot of things to talk about. So please tweet this out. Bring your friends and family. Always a pleasure to interact with all of you. And we're here on here. People are not getting the notifications as they once did. So be sure to hit the notifications bell. Be sure to make sure you're subscribed. Very strange, but we keep going. We're not stopping. We're here. We're going to keep doing this. The way the show works is the first half of the show is just my opening remarks. I just talk. That's what I do. But the whole time, I am taking my pen and I'm writing down your super chat questions. The second half of the show is me answering your super chat questions. That's how this show works. That's how this show works. So, welcome everybody. So glad you're here. And so, yeah, I do the roll call after I'm done with my opening remarks. Then I answer your super chat questions in the second half of the show. That's how these things work. So I'm going to jump right into my opening remarks. And after that, I'll answer your super chat questions after the roll call. First part, opening remarks. Second part, roll call. Third part, super chat questions. That's how the cookie crumbles. That's how we roll. That's how we do it. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and away we go. So folks, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ear. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. Sarcasm. But no, I saw people in the chat. I looked at the chat before I got going on here, since we were a little bit delayed. We were originally going to start at 10:30, but then it turned into 11. I looked at the chat a little bit, and I noticed people discussing the Mighty Morphing Power Rangers. Now, the Mighty Morphing Power Rangers was a television program that was popular in the 1990s. It was a children's television program. It originated in Japan, but they adapted it with American actors in the 1990s. And it was the center of a lot of controversy, right? All right, USSR defeated Nazis because of winter. Well, that show was a center of controversy, as I recall. Children throughout the United States were doing the karate moves that they watched on the Power Rangers and injuring each other. Some religious folks felt that that there was some satanic, non-Christian imagery in the Power Rangers. Their power source was something other than God. They worshipped some guy who was like a ghost or something like that. Any show that children were interested in, especially those days, was going to become the center of controversy. But one thing I remember about the Mighty Morphing Power Rangers, what I remember was that they had a theme song, and the theme song. Thank you for the super chat. The theme song of the Mighty Morphing Power Rangers, if I recall correctly, the lyrics were not deeply profound. The lyrics to their theme song, if you remember correctly, went like this. I will recite them. I will not sing them for you, but I will recite the lyrics, the deeply profound and poetic lyrics to the theme song of this popular television show from the 1990s. The lyrics went like this. Go, go, Power Rangers. Go, go, Power Rangers. Go, go, Power Rangers. Mighty Morphing Power Rangers. Very profound. I mean, it was amazing stuff. I mean, I remember I looked up at one point. I was looking for something. There's actually a lyricist listed. Not only does the song have a musical composer, but there is someone who actually wrote those lyrics and got paid for it. And every time the Mighty Morphing Power Rangers TV program is played on the air, they make money. They make royalties off of having written those deeply, deeply profound and poetic words. I always joked that, that they would have like a conference of songwriters. Amazing, famous songwriters. John Lennon would be there. And the guy who wrote MacArthur Park would be there. And, they'd be there and he'd be sitting there. He'd be wearing his suit, drinking his champagne with the other famous lyricists. And he'd be sitting there and someone would be like, hey, what did you write? Oh, I wrote a theme song to a popular television program. Yes, yeah. What was the TV program again? Oh, it was a Japanese kind of thing, a foreign piece that they showed. No, what was it? Mighty Morphing Power Rangers. Really, really. Now, how did the lyrics to that go? I don't quite remember. Oh, well, I thought that it was best to have an action, right? That when you want to make something proud, when you want to emphasize, you really wanted to have an action theme. So I started out with the word go. Go, Power Rangers. That's how I did it. It was about action. So I thought about it a lot. I wanted to have an action. So I figured action, go, and then I repeated it. Because if you want people to remember something, repetition is one of the most beloved, important poetic techniques. And then after that, I repeated it again, and then I just stated the name of the show. It was simplicity. I was going for simplicity. This is hilarious, folks. I'm joking about this. The communists search for truth. Communists search for truth versus lived experience. And, I joke about this, but it's, it is kind of funny. And apparently there are, it's part of a longer song. After having this vision in my head, apparently that is only the chorus. They only would play the chorus of the song on the children's television program. There are actually verses. If you listen to the complete version, that go, go, Power Rangers thing, that is only the chorus. But there are verses that have more profound lyrics in them. I just find the whole thing to be funny. It's kind of like the Washington Monument, right? And I've talked about this many times, for those of you who are familiar, but I have long had a theory about the Washington Monument, right? It's cliche. Everyone in the world looks at the Washington Monument and says, what does that look like? Ha, 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 right? Very funny. Very, very funny, right? We all know what it looks like. Ha, ha, ha. That's like the junior high level humor. What does the Washington Monument look like? It's big, it's tall, it's pointy, it has a head on it. Ah, ha, 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 right? So funny. However, there's another layer to it. And the layer is that it is a monument in honor of George Washington, the first president of the United States. And what is interesting about George Washington, if you read a biography, which I did, if you did a report on him when you were in school, which I did, you will learn that George Washington, his children were all adopted. In school, whenever you learn about George Washington, they tell you that he had wooden teeth. And then later, as you get older, you learn the teeth weren't really wooden, they were made out of ivory. And then you get older and you learn other awful things about him, that he was bad in many, many ways. But regardless, and he didn't really cut down a cherry tree, wasn't a nice guy, but regardless of all of that, all of George Washington's children were adopted. Fact, all of his children were adopted. His wife was never pregnant. And anyone who reads about this will tell you why. And that is because, as a child, George Washington had the measles. He had the measles. And the measles left George Washington sterile and left George Washington, did not go through puberty. He had a very high nasally voice, and he was quite effeminate as a result of this childhood condition that he had. But it gets even more interesting, because this did not stop George Washington. George Washington, as you know, was the richest man in the 13 colonies. George Washington was also a great military hero of the British military, the French and Indian War, went on to become the leader of the military in the American Revolution, became the first president of the United States of America. So George Washington, despite, not being able to bear children, he was indeed a very successful person, most wealthy person in the 13 colonies. Great military hero, first president of the United States. So when you look at that monument, it forces me to envision a scene, because I know that back then they had pubs. They had pubs, right? They had pubs. And people would get together and drink alcohol. That was a big thing among the founding fathers of the United States. The taverns. I imagine George Washington in the tavern, and all his friends are toasting him, saluting him. They're saying, George Washington, you have it all. You have everything. You're the richest man. You're the military hero. You're the first president of the country. But there is one thing that all of us can do that you cannot do. And as a joke, when you die, we are going to build a giant monument to you. But that monument will be shaped. It will be shaped like something that we can all do that you cannot do. That is my joke about the Washington Monument. I have no evidence that this is actually what occurred. It's supposed to be an Egyptian obelisk, right? It's in honor of ancient Egypt. It's supposed to be an obelisk. Apparently, according to what I understand, the reason that they selected an obelisk, according to historians, the reason they selected an obelisk, I'm being all serious here, joking aside, this is actually serious, is because in ancient Rome, the Romans had obelisks. And why did the Romans have obelisks? Because the Romans conquered the Egyptians. And so to celebrate their conquest over the Egyptians, they took the obelisks of the Egyptians, uprooted them, and took them to Rome as a symbol of Rome's domination of the world. Aha. And let's get further than that. Why did the ancient Egyptians build obelisks? Obelisks were intended to look like rays of the sun, apparently, from what I've been told. They were intended to look like rays of the sun, and the Egyptians were sun worshippers, and they believed so they had spiritual beliefs centered around the sun. So the obelisk was a sun ray. It was like a sun ray. It was supposed to be a ray of the sun, as Red Illuminati in the chat says, to appease the god Ra. So there you go. there you go, folks. I'm talking about all kinds of different things. Folks, it is nearing the end of September. We are approaching October. Um, and a lot of exciting things are happening. The Center for Political Innovation is on the move. We had an amazing conference in California. Before that, we had an amazing conference in Pennsylvania. We have published a number of books. The very first book that we published as the Center for Political Innovation was The Green Book by Muammar Gaddafi. The Green Book. This is the first Center for Political Innovation book. Well over 1,000 copies of this book have sold. It is the top-selling edition of Gaddafi's Green Book on Amazon. Let me repeat that. Over 1,000 copies of this have sold, and it is the top-selling edition of Gaddafi's Green Book on Amazon. Why? Why is that? Well, I'll show you why. Couple reasons. Reason number one, it has a table of contents with page numbers in it. Most of the other editions of Gaddafi's Green Book that you can find on Amazon.com do not have page numbers. They are books that have been cut and paste by somebody. Well, if you get our edition, you'll get page numbers and a table of contents. Furthermore, what else? In addition to that, if you get the Center for Political Innovation edition of Gaddafi's Green Book, it has an actual picture of Gaddafi in the book. And thanks to the contribution of Gavin Lockhart, who deserves prop for this, not only that, it has some of the original artwork. It has the original artwork in it, right? Most of the other editions that you can get do not have the original artwork from Gaddafi's Green Book. And on top of that, there is an introduction by Caleb Maupin. I wrote the introduction to the Green Book, and this introduction is, this introduction is 17 pages long. 17 pages long. So, on top of that, this is better priced than the other editions of the Green Book, right? Most editions of the Green Book, are more expensive. So, when people get the Center for Political Innovation edition of the Green Book, they're getting a lot more for their dollar. They're getting an introduction that explains the history of Libya's socialist revolution. They're getting the original artwork. They're getting a table of contents. They're getting page numbers. There you go. The Green Book. Success. I would say this is a success, and it's a great contribution because many people buy the Green Book, and they buy it simply because they want to learn the history of Libya. But then they will read an introduction written by myself, a socialist and an anti-imperialist, and they'll learn about the economic successes of socialism in Libya. They'll learn about the lies told to justify the invasion. They will learn something that they wouldn't get from just the text of the book. So this is a contribution. This is a contribution, and this is a blow against the imperialists. The fact that as college students around the country study the Libyan war, or writing term papers on Gaddafi, they're going to go buy probably the cheapest edition they can find, or probably the highest rated edition they can find, and they'll get their hands on this, and they will learn an anti-imperialist, city-building socialist message. I'm happy about that. Very, very happy about that. Now, that is not all that we have done. We published our book on Kamala Harris, right? All right, In Between Bourgeoisie and Proletariat. Proletariat. CPI, land, publish. Chinese books. Not only that, but we published the Center for Political Innovation Educational Manual. We are city builders. And around the country, people are using this manual for educational reading groups. In Texas, every week, every Sunday in Texas, they have a reading group based on this book. In New York City, every day, practically, we get together, the John Brown Volunteers, we have a meeting, our daily meeting where we discuss, local activities, and we read from this book. And in California, there are reading groups around this book. And in Chicago, they are having weekly reading groups around this book. This book is an organizing tool for building an organization. Right? It is the educational manual of the Center for Political Innovation. Very, very good stuff. We published the book on Kamala Harris. We published Bread Tube Serves Imperialism. Bread Tube Serves Imperialism, let me add, was the top-selling book on the category of anarchism for 2 weeks. For 2 weeks. It was the top new release in the category of anarchism on Amazon. Now that is something phenomenal. That is pretty big. But now, folks, drum roll, please. Drum roll, please. Those of you who aren't aware, we now have available our new book, Jesus is a Socialist, edited by Caleb Maupin and Keaton Mansfield. We have Jesus is a Socialist available. You can read Jesus is a Socialist, this small book full of Bible verses, full of quotations from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., an essay by Eugene Debs, an essay by Edward Bellamy, and an introduction from Keaton Mansfield, and a conclusion from myself. All right, Ghana's government has allowed the U.S. military to take over 1 and 3 terminals in the main port. Gives another foothold in Africa. All right, U.S. government. Military. Ghana takes 1, 3 terminals. So there you go. It is now available. It is now available. Jesus is a Socialist. And, we have some distribution and promotion ideas for this book. We want to get it in the hands of people. And it's, we did learn from the, it's bigger print, right? The print is not smaller as it was in some of our other books. It's mainly, we have Bible verses. We have quotations from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and, there's a conclusion written by me and an introduction. It's something special. This is something special. This is not a book that you'd find every day. Now, if you go below, in the link below, you can find the link to where you can order a copy of this book on Amazon. And if you click on that link, not only will you be able to get a copy of the book, but you'll also see that as of today, there is 1 review of this book. This is just classic. I couldn't not talk about this. Every so often you get an idea and you don't want to talk about it. You think, don't talk about that, Caleb. I'm going to talk about this, right? So I looked, I checked. There's 1 review, negative review, and it's just some conservative ranting, so I just didn't think anything of it. But I had to show it to the co-author, the co-editor, Keaton Mansfield. So it turns out the 1 negative review of the book is not just written by a random person. It's written by Lawrence Reed. You can't make this up. The 1 negative review on there, the only review that's up there, is written by a man named Lawrence Reed, who works for the Freedom Economics Foundation, a libertarian think tank, and who is the author of a book that was already published called Jesus is Not a Socialist. No, you can't make this. You cannot make this up. You go and check the link right now. I am not lying to you. Lawrence Reed, who works for the Libertarian Freedom Economic Foundation, was so threatened by this book and was so worked up by this book that he wrote a review himself of this book that he wrote. And yeah, that was hilarious. That was hilarious. That was hilarious. I mean, it was just utterly hilarious. Wow. So, the author of Jesus is Not a Socialist was so threatened by Jesus is a Socialist coming out and being published that he felt a need to opine. But what is the thrust of Lawrence Reed, or I guess Larry, as some like to call him? What is the thrust of Larry's argument against this book? Larry says that Jesus did call for feeding the poor. Jesus did believe in kindness and compassion, all the things that libertarians like Ayn Rand believe is a deviation, is weakness, is a problem that is destroying the human race. Altruism, all the things libertarians hate, people being nice to each other, people having compassion, people not being selfish, people giving to a cause, to a higher purpose. All those things libertarians hate. He admits Jesus did actually preach those things. However, according to the entire argument, his entire argument, Lawrence Reed's entire argument is predicated on Jesus did not believe in, quote, coercive force. That's his argument, right? That Jesus wanted people to be nice to each other in a completely voluntary way. That Jesus did not believe in coercive force. Jesus did not believe in coercive force. That is his argument, right? So he concedes that Jesus was not a libertarian psychopath. Jesus did not, want to take food out of the mouths of hungry children. Jesus did want people to be compassionate and to be kind. Jesus did condemn the rich and powerful and the wealthy. Jesus did, say the last shall be first and the first shall be last. However, all of this, according to Lawrence Reed, none of it involves calling for coercive force. Coercive force. And because of that, Jesus, because he never called for coercive force, Jesus can't be a socialist because socialism is force. Socialism is theft. It's people taking things from other people. It's the government coming and taking things from people, right? Thoughts on the EU revolutionary movements in Europe. EU rev movements in Europe. And I hear, his argument. I hear the argument that Larry Lawrence is making. But there's a little bit of a problem with that, which is one of the main verses from the Bible that people point to as an example of Jesus believing in socialism is from the book of Acts. I will read it to you. 1 second. It's in the book of Acts, the Acts of the Apostles. All right, it's on page 22 of the book. We quote Acts verses 4:32 through 35. All the believers were one in heart and mind. And no one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and God's grace was so powerfully at work in them that there was no needy persons among them. For from time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them and brought the money from the sales and put it at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to anyone who had need. Well, that describes how the early church, the early Christian church, was living in a socialist way. And if you continue reading in the book of Acts, you will learn that this was not optional because of an individual named Ananias. The scripture, the book of Acts, tells us of an individual by the name of Ananias, who was an early Christian, who had some land and sold it and kept the money to himself and did not share all things in common. And what happened? According to the scripture, he was struck down. God killed him for hoarding his wealth and deceiving the disciples, not sharing his wealth. So if the punishment for not sharing one's wealth is death, that sounds a bit coercive, does it not? And apparently the disciples explained to everybody that the reason that Ananias was struck down by God was because he lied and did not share his wealth with everybody. So if the punishment for not sharing one's wealth is being killed, that would lead me to think that perhaps the way the apostles were living, according to Acts verses 4:32 through 35, perhaps there was an element of coercion in it. But there you go. You can go and read Lawrence's argument. Lawrence Reed's arguments for yourself, and you can go and read our argument for yourself. I, in the conclusion, do not make a scriptural literalist argument for socialism. That's not the point of this book, right? I talk about Christianity's origins in Rome. Keaton, in his introduction, talks about the role of Christianity in American politics. We have the quotations from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. About socialism. We have the quotations from Edward Bellamy and from Eugene V. Debs. And go and read it for yourself. Read what we have to say. Read what Lawrence has to say. I encourage you to have an open mind and hear our perspectives. But the fact that Lawrence Reed is so furious that we publish this book, I believe there's another book called The Little Red Book, written by Mao Zedong. And in the Little Red Book, Mao Zedong says, to be attacked by the enemy is a good thing, not a bad thing. To be attacked by the enemy is a good thing, not a bad thing. And it appears that the fact that Lawrence Reed felt a need to lash out at our newly published book, it's great. And, people are buying it. And we have the reason I have this book in my hand is because the shipment that we ordered of 80 copies for distribution in the New York City area has just arrived, more on their way. We've got a job to do. And, not everyone is religious. The CPI, the Center for Political Innovation, is not a religious organization. But we felt a need to publish this book and make this argument, so we did. And I'm glad we did. And we're already creating a stir, it seems. But I did want to talk about a more serious thing, which is the recent hearings on Capitol Hill, the revelations about General Milley and his role. Did General Milley go behind Donald Trump's back to communicate with China? People are asking, was the president really in charge? And as I said this morning in an interview with Sputnik Radio, this points to an ugly reality of U.S. society that has gone on for a long time, which is that at the end of the day, it's not just true for the United States, it's true for any society. What is the essence of the state? What is the essence of the state, right? If you read The State and Revolution by Vladimir Lenin, and you read any theory of the state, what is the essence of the state, right? Lawrence Reed is so worried about coercive force. What is the essence of the state? The state is a body of armed men with a legitimacy on armed force. That is the essence of what the state is. The state is the police. The state is the military. The state is the intelligence apparatus. The state is a body of armed men with legitimacy on armed force. You're not allowed to arrest people. You're not allowed to beat people up. You're not allowed to imprison people. You're not allowed to kill people. The state is, pending government shutdown. The state is. The state is a monopoly on violence, and it is armed force, and that it is a little bit of a problem that we like to pretend that we're a democracy. We like to pretend that we're a democracy and that the state is controlled by popular power. The civilian government has the upper hand, that this body of armed force is subject to popular control. When it really gets down to it, that's not really the case. Sam Marcy, the founder of the Workers' World Party, wrote a book called Generals Over the White House. And the book was written about how the military-industrial complex was firing Jimmy Carter from the presidency, and how the rise of Ronald Reagan was very much a very key section of the U.S. economy, the military-industrial complex, rising up and being in revolt against Jimmy Carter. There's a book called The Yankee and Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby. And the book describes pretty much how the military-industrial complex has battled for power against the Eastern establishment, and there are divisions among the U.S. elite, that the military-industrial complex, is such an essential part of the U.S. economy. You have the CIA, and there are different factions among the American elite. And when it really gets down to it, the president is a figurehead. The president is at the front. The president has influence. The president can be friendlier to some factions than others. However, when it really gets down to it, the power in the United States lies with those who have the money, and the power in the United States lies with those who have the guns. And no, not your hunting rifle, not your shotgun. No, those who have the huge monopoly on armed force. And those who have the money and those who have the guns are largely the same entity. The big corporations in the United States, General Electric, Boeing, Raytheon, those are also the weapons manufacturers. And as much as the United States pretends to be this egalitarian democracy, in reality, the United States is very much the rule of the dollar backed up by the rule of the gun. And that is the reality of U.S. society. And it has only been through popular movements for justice, organizing, demanding peace, demanding civil liberties, demanding freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, demanding the right to form labor unions. It's only been through popular movements that has been pushed back. And that's the reality of U.S. society. The Bill of Rights was not originally in the Constitution. It was only added because the American people demanded it. It was popular struggles that got the minimum wage, that got the weekend, that got women the right to vote, that got union representation on the job. And if we are going to get through this crisis that we were in, if we're going to get through this crisis, we need to look into the history of class struggle. We need to look into the history of organizing for justice, struggling against imperialism. That's what we need to do. We need to revive that history. We need to rediscover the John Browns, the Harriet Tubmans, the Eugene Debs, the Gus Halls of American history. We need to rebuild a revolutionary working class movement for our time. And if we're going to do that, we need to dump this land back stuff. Okay? Now, I am 100% in favor of the regional autonomy for colonized people. If indigenous groups want to break away and form their own national territory separate from the United States, I support that. And if the Chicano people of the Old Southwest want to form the Sun Belt or Aztlan, a separate territory, if they as a group want to do that, I support that. If black people in the United States, the descendants of slaves, want to separate from the United States and form a black republic for regional autonomy, they have the right to do that. But beyond that, the whole conversation gets derailed anytime anyone gets up and says, this is stolen land. Yes, it is. It is stolen land. You are right about that. This is stolen land. Native Americans suffered from genocide. There was mass murder. Yes, this country was founded on slavery. Absolutely, this country was founded on slavery. You betcha. It built itself up as a world power. Wall Street banks were involved in the slave trade. No doubt about it. Furthermore, it's because of imperialism and the exploitation of countries in the developing world that for so long the United States had a high standard of living. You betcha. I don't deny any of that. I do not deny any of that. And if you think I'm denying that, you are lying. I'm not denying any of this. I am not denying that the United States is fruit of a poison tree. I'm not denying that the manner in which the United States as it currently exists came into existence was wrong, immoral, fraudulent. I'm not denying that this country is dripping with blood. I'm not denying that. I'm not denying that for 1 second. What I'm telling you is that saying that doesn't accomplish anything. It is a derail. It is a classic derail. You could derail every progressive struggle in the history of this country with this conversation, right? Imagine that back when there was no minimum wage, people were organizing for a minimum wage. I could have shown up and said, what? You want higher wages on stolen land? Oh, can't march for a better wage because it's on stolen land. What if at the time women had been organizing for the right to vote? I could have shown up and said, oh, you want the right to vote? You have no right to vote here because this is stolen land. This is a derail. Okay, it's a derail. It's a derail. It is a derail. Okay? The fact that the United States, as it currently exists, is founded in an impure, immoral way is indisputable. But if you just simply say that and repeat that, I don't know what you're accomplishing. Indigenous groups in the United States are not calling for the deportation of all white people living in the United States. They're not. They're calling, some of them want their own national territory, some of them don't. There's a lot of indigenous folks in the United States who serve in the military. I'm sorry, I've been to reservations. There are a number of indigenous folks who are conservative and vote for Republicans and serve in the military. There's many who don't. There's many indigenous folks who don't, right? There are many indigenous folks who are very proud of their heritage, who want to be separate, want to have their own national territory. But indigenous folks in the United States are not calling for all white people to be deported from the land of North America. The only people who are calling for that are edgy white teenagers on the internet. And this land back thing is a derail. It is a way to avoid having the difficult conversation about the fact that we need the country to be refounded on new values. It was created in an impure way. And we need a new America. We need a new America created on new values. We need a new country founded on values of solidarity, brotherhood, sisterhood, compassion, kindness. That's what we need. We need a new America based on cooperation and socialism. We need a new America that trades with countries on the basis of win-win cooperation. We need a new America And no, this isn't simply a matter of implementing a few reforms. This is a matter of uprooting the social system of capitalism, production organized for profit, and reorganizing the United States on socialist lines, reorganizing the United States with an economy centered around serving public good and not the profits of a few, and uprooting imperialism. And that's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy task. No one's telling you that that is an easy task to accomplish. It is not going to be easy. But the way that that is done is with a program. You need to bring forward a program that challenges property relations. The Communist Manifesto says communists never conceal their views and aims. They support every uprising against the existing order of things, but in all of them they bring forth the property question. That is what our task is, to bring forth the property question. And this is the task of communists in the United States. It is to raise demands that challenge the social system of capitalism and could lead to a pushing back of the power of capitalists and the building up of popular power, which could then lead toward the creation of a new state, a new government based on new values, a new government apparatus, new kinds of police, new kinds of military, new kinds of community organizations. And that, of course, could then lead to a total reorganization of the U.S. economy. Right? That it's by bringing forward a program that unifies working people, a program that would benefit working people, mobilizing them to challenge capitalist power, building a movement around such policies. That is the basis on which communists organize. And they don't organize by just telling people, you're on stolen land, I hate this country, it's evil. What does that accomplish? It's a derail. It's a cheap way out. It's a way to avoid doing the hard work of learning how to talk to people, learning how to bring people together, learning how to build real relationships, learning how to build coalitions with people who you might not agree with, but you can agree on a program. It's not easy. It's very difficult to do the task that we aim to do. But I argue that we're entering a time where it's going to be a lot easier than it used to be. It used to be nobody in the United States was interested in socialism. Now interest in socialism and anti-capitalism is pretty widespread. It used to be people in the United States loved the wars. They supported the military, love it or leave it, move to some other country. Now people are opposed to these wars overwhelmingly. It used to be that white folks and non-white folks were miles apart, didn't live in the same neighborhoods, didn't speak to each other. That's not the case. This country is more racially integrated than it's ever been. The living standard is dropping. The country is becoming less stable. But the consciousness is changing. And the ability to build real solidarity, anti-imperialism, popular working class power is growing greater every day. But you've got to seize the moment. You've got to seize the moment. You've got to seize the moment. You have got to seize the moment. You've got to seize the moment. Folks, I will just tell you what needs to be said. Right? I tell myself this every day because it's hard to believe sometimes. It is a hard thing to comprehend. It's very hard to comprehend this. But I remind myself of this every day. And that is this. It's this. That Eugene Debs, Gus Hall, Malcolm X, Huey Newton, Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, all of them are jealous of us. All of them are deeply jealous of us. And why are they jealous of us? Because they did not live to see socialism come to the United States. They did not live to see the United States move towards socialism. They did not live to see the empire come down. They did not live to see capitalism in the United States overturned. They worked very hard to try and bring it about. They struggled and they sacrificed and they went to prison and they got beaten up and they got arrested, but they did not live to see the empire they were fighting against come down. But we're going to. We're going to. We are going to. We are living in the last days of American imperialism. We are living in the last days of American empire. We didn't have a revolution in the 1930s amid the Great Depression. We didn't have a revolution during the 1960s amid the political turmoil, the Black liberation struggle, the struggle against the Vietnam War. But the only way out of the current crisis unfolding in this country right now is moving towards socialism. This is a prolonged crisis of capitalism. This is capitalism in decay. And if you look at this situation, they can't buy their way out of it. They can't stabilize things. This crisis is going to continue, and it's going to get worse until popular power beats back the bankers and the war makers. We are living in the last days of American imperialism. It is darkest before dawn. But all of those people, all those great revolutionaries in times past were deeply jealous. They're deeply jealous of us. Deeply jealous. Because none of them had the opportunity that we have. We are going to see the end, the final conflict. We're going to see something beautiful emerge from the decline of capitalism. We're going to see something very, very nice. So on that note, folks, I want you to keep that in mind. I want you to live like we can actually see the end of capitalism. I want you to organize like it. I want you to think like we can win. Don't think like we're just going to be angry people on the internet. Don't think like you're trying to prove that you're so much more revolutionary than somebody else. I want you to think like we can win, because we can win. We can win. I think we can win. We are being handed a great opportunity by history. And if we take advantage of that opportunity, we can win. We can win. It's happening. It's happening, folks. It's happening. And on that note, I would like to do the roll call. Names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Who's in the chat with us tonight? Names and locations. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. Raphael in Brazil. Scottish Maoist, Cleveland, Wisconsin. Go team. Chaya from Montreal. Caden in Utah. Calgary, Canada. Micah, Las Vegas. Io Hillary in New York. Shout out to you. Sam in Chicago. Johnny in Toronto. Nate from South Dakota and Chicago today. Dare to struggle, dare to win, says the Red Precarian. Oh, it rhymes. Wow. There you go. Idaho, St. David's, Bermuda. Ian in Alba, JT24 in Mississippi. Alan in Chicago. David in Burlington, Vermont. Steph in Los Angeles, California. Arturo from Alaska. We stand ready. SoCal, Southern California. SoCal, so red, so red. Theo in Rust Belt. Jorge in Virginia. Northern California. Metal Nick. Brian Schaefer out in Illinois. Milwaukee. Enoch from Australia. Kieran from San Diego. Ben from Denver. Detroit Motor City, Mindanao to Midwest. Patrick from Los Angeles. Bendigo, Australia. David Fox, good friend of the program. Shout out to you. Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati, Ohio. Mike in North Carolina. Tucson, Arizona. San Miguel, Mexico. Matthew in Chicago. Sebastian in Florida. Carolyn and Dario in Brooklyn. Shout out to you. Clyde Bank. Richard in Staten Island. Richie, shout out to you, Richie, good friend of the program. Joanne in Nyeri, or Joanne in the Netherlands. Ben in Suffolk County. Bobby in Austin. Orestes in Florida. Anthony Penza in Cleveland. Mexican Tanky from Los Angeles. There you go. There you go. Don D in New York City. Shout out to you, Don D. West Virginia, Northern Michigan, Western Massachusetts, Auckland, New Zealand, FEMA Camp Region 1. Very good. Leo and Mimi from Mexico. I'm in Florida. Julian from Texas. Shout out to you, Julian. Shaman in Kitchener. Cincinnati, Ohio. Ramsey R. Lockport, New York. There we go. Northern California. There we go. Ukiah, California. Italian in the USA. Ontario. Johnny from Los Angeles. Shout out to you, Johnny from Los Angeles, California. Right? Tommy Farras. Right? Cameron Smith, the Myth in New Haven. Shout out to you, Cameron. I don't like to use my real name. All right. Captain Waffles. Very good. Calgary. Very, very good, folks. Very, very good. So now this is the part of the show where I answer super chat questions. And if you have a super chat question, by all means, shoot me a super chat and I will give you an answer. The first super chat question we've got is someone says, what do you say to those who say that the Soviet Union defeated the Nazis only because they got lucky because of the winter? Open a history book, my friend. Adolf Hitler was a great admirer of Napoleon, and Napoleon had been defeated in Russia because of the winter. So Hitler specifically planned his invasion of the Soviet Union to avoid the winter. Did you know that? Adolf Hitler saw that Napoleon had been defeated by the Russian winter. War and Peace is the novel about that. So Hitler planned his invasion specifically to avoid the Russian winter, and he still got defeated. Right? And the Soviet Union took Berlin. The Soviet Union tore down the walls of Auschwitz concentration camp. The Soviet Union destroyed the Nazis. Stalingrad was the turning point in the war. The bravery of the Soviet people and their defeat of fascism is something that so few people know about. So few people know about. It's been so obscured. They're doing so much to try and rewrite the history of the Second World War, to make us think that somehow the Nazis and the communists were on the same side. No. The communists, starting in 1935, had the policy of building a global people's front against fascism. The communists led the underground resistance in France and Germany and Japan. The Communist Red Army in China defeated the Japanese invaders. The role of the communists in the Second World War was tremendous. The whole world was in admiration of what the communists achieved during World War II. Their anti-fascist record was phenomenal, and that's why when they had elections in France and in Italy after World War II, the Communist Party surged in membership. In Italy, the CIA had to have Operation Gladio to make sure that the communists didn't come to power. So, yeah, those who say the USSR just got lucky have no idea what they are talking about. Now, Shaya asked, what about those who become communists searching for truth rather than through lived experience? Well, here's the thing. You know, it reminds me of a very funny conversation I had years ago. There was a woman I knew years ago. She'd been in a communist group her entire life. And I asked her one day, I said, how did you become a communist? And she said, well, I became a communist. I realized communism was right when I first got a job, and I saw that my boss was ripping me off, and that we produce the wealth and the capitalists make profits from it. That was what she first told me. But then I got to know her, and as I got to know her, I learned that was bullshit. You know how she became a communist? She became a communist because she was in high school during the Vietnam War. And when she was 14 years old, there was a walkout at her high school against the Vietnam War. And she went to this walkout. She walked out of school in protest of the Vietnam War. And at the protest, there were a group of people waving the flag of the Vietnamese National Liberation Front, chanting, ho, ho, Ho Chi Minh, the NLF is going to win. And she thought they were really badass because they were waving the flag of the enemy, and they had just walked out of school, and she started hanging out with this group of people that were waving the NLF flag. And I many times reflected on that, because that story that she first gave me, that, oh, I realized my boss was ripping me off. See, that's like something that, that's like a caricature. That's like LARPing. That's LARPing to some degree or other. When people become communists through their lived experience, it's not their lived experience of suffering from capitalism. It's their lived experience of fighting back against capitalism. Right? You read about the 1930s, you read about the Black Liberation Movement, you read about the history. It's the lived experience of fighting back. You read about the Chinese Revolution. It is the fact that the communists organized people that were suffering, peasants, workers in factories, and led their organizations of resistance and mobilized them to fight back. And in the process, made them aware of why their conditions took place, of what the solution was. The lived experience that makes people communists is the lived experience of fighting back under communist leadership. It's not the experience of just being exploited. It's not the experience of just suffering, right? There are certain levels of class consciousness that are there, right? People realize their boss is mistreating them. People realize that they're being exploited. People realize that the police are not their friends. These are basic things, but it takes organization and leadership to transform that into a struggle to tear down the entire system. Now, people who become communists because they're searching for truth, and it's kind of an academic interest. The problem with that is that it doesn't translate into actually doing anything to achieve it. There are many people who become communists because they're looking for the truth, and they become communists, and then they feel like they can just sit alone and be on the internet and feel content knowing that they know the truth and that they are alienated from society. And if they're just looking for some kind of intellectual exercise, that's what you get. The internet is full of those people, right? The internet is full of people who, being a communist is a way they can feel like they are right and the society around them is wrong. And that is not what we need. However, if the search for truth then leads you to ask the question, how do we actually do something about it? And that leads you to try and build organizations of struggle. That's a good thing. What I would say is that, you know, when communism is real, when communist movements are on the brink of winning, people don't have to seek them out. That's what I had to do. I had to seek them out. I lived in a small town when I was a kid, you know. I lived in a small town. I didn't know any communists. I had to get on the internet and Google communists and find them. Right? Nowadays, most people that are communists discover communism on their own by reading about it in a history book or hearing about communists on TV. They get interested in communism and they go and find communist groups. And they go and track down communist groups. That's how it works. And that means we're not at this point in a revolutionary period, right? We're in a period in which we could get to one. We're in a capitalist crisis that could become one, but we're not in a revolutionary period because in a revolutionary period, people don't discover communism on their own and go and look for communists. Rather, in their daily life, as they are struggling and engaging in progressive struggles to end the war, to fight for their rights, to fight for their conditions, they encounter people who are communists. And they see the communists in their community. They see communist organizations in their neighborhood that are struggling on their behalf. And that's how they learn about communists. And right now, that's not how people learn about communists in the United States. People learn about communists in a history book or in an academic way, and then they have to go track them down. Well, that means that we're not in a period. We need to transition away from this. We need to instead have a period where the communists find people, the people don't find the communists. Where people are hungry, they're in their neighborhood, they're hungry, and there's a free food distribution going on, and they go down there, and they learn that the people giving the free food away are communists. We need there to be a situation where just like there are churches and communities, just like there are community organizations that meet people's needs, there are communists meeting people's needs. People need to be confronted by communists. People don't need to have to track down the communists. People should get a knock on their door. Hi, I'm from a local communist organization. I want to tell you what we're all about. Just like you get a knock on the door from the Jehovah's Witnesses, you get a knock on the door from the Book of Mormon, you should get a knock on the door from the communists. Right? That's how it should be done. Out of the movement to the masses. To the masses. The masses shouldn't have to come looking for us. We should go looking for the masses. And we should be constantly looking for a new angle, a new way to reach the masses. Whether it's Jesus is a socialist, whether it's, organizing around different issues, there should constantly be a new maneuver to get to the masses. We can't wait for the masses to come to us. We certainly don't want to be involved in the movement, right? The people protesting and doing whatever liberals and Democrats are doing this week. It's about getting to the masses. Getting to the masses. All righty. What about those in between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, other classes? All right, so Marxism defines the bourgeoisie as those who own the banks, factories, and industries, major centers of economic power. The proletariat are those who sell their labor power to a boss. Right? Pretty simple, straightforward. But there's but if you read Capital by Karl Marx, if you read a lot of this stuff, it's not so simple. First question that comes up, right? The nature of the proletariat, according to Marx, is that he produces surplus value, right? He makes profits for his boss, right? He doesn't get paid the value that he puts into the commodity, right? The value that he puts into it, he doesn't get all of it. The surplus value is stolen by the capitalist, right? So the worker in the factory who's doing productive labor to create the commodity, doesn't get the full value of his labor. But then that raises the question, what about the service worker who's not making a commodity? What about the domestic worker? What about the maid who cleans the boss's house? What about the nanny who takes care of the boss's kids? What about the restaurant worker? What about them? They're not, on the factory floor producing commodities. They're not producing value in the Marxian sense. But they're still proletarians because they're selling their labor power. They're selling their labor power. They have nothing to lose but their chains. They have nothing to sell but their own labor. So they're still proletarians. But then the question comes, what about the manager? Now, the manager in the factory is not driving the worker to produce the commodity, or is not producing the commodity himself. He's driving other workers to produce the commodity. Well, the idea is the manager is what you call an agent, meaning that he's hired not to produce value for the capitalist, not even to sell his labor power, but to oversee and drive other workers. So he's technically, if you want to use the broad definition, he's technically a proletarian because he's selling his labor power. But because he's driving other workers, he's an agent. Then that raises the question, what about the police? Well, the police are a similar thing. They're enforcing the rule of law. They're enforcing the property relations. They're enforcing the capitalist state. So they are agents, not proletarians. They're agents. And then what about the small business owner? Well, the small business owner, right, is not technically a proletarian because he's not selling his labor power. He's owning for a living, just like the capitalists own, but he's not part of the ruling class. He has a small business of his own. He's barely staying afloat. He's struggling. He's basically subservient to the banks that dominate him. He's dependent on them for credit. He's basically making profits for the bank. It's the bank who makes the profit at the end of the day because he has to pay back those loans. And the banks are making money because he's constantly getting loans in order to survive. So yes, technically he's a capitalist, but he's what you call the petty bourgeoisie, the lower level capitalist. He doesn't have the power, right? Congress isn't calling up Joe the bar owner and asking him for policy. No, right? He's not part of the ruling class, but he is technically, an owner of means of production. What about all the people in jail, in prison? Well, most people in prison are working. They're just getting paid very, very little. Did you know that? A lot of labor goes on in prisons. Did you know that? A lot of working people are getting paid in prison. A lot of times, if you are talking to somebody on the phone, that's from a prison call center. A lot of times, if there are products being manufactured in prisons. Okay, but what about criminals, Caleb? What about criminals? What about drug dealers? What about thieves, robbers? What about the mafia? What about that? Well, that's what you call the lumpen proletariat. The lumpen proletariat. And those are, marginal folks who live off of the working class, right? They live off of the wealth of the laboring nation, as Karl Marx put it, right? They are lumpenized, the lumpen proletariat, criminals. So this is where it all gets tricky. Yes, there are two main class camps, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, but there are many subdivisions, according to the overall Marxist theory. All right. Does the Center for Political Innovation plan to publish Soviet and Chinese books? I'm open to publishing different things. First thing first, though, copyright. Copyright is important, right? Copyright is important. You don't want to, violate the copyright, or we would have a problem. Second thing is that we do have limited space and resources. It's not cheap to put out a book. You have to hire a layout person to lay it out. You have to hire a cover designer to design it. If you write any of it yourself, you have to hire a proofreader, especially if you're me, because I make loads of typos. I needed proofreaders very badly. These things add up. right? So putting out a book is it's work. I mean, that's why they have publishing companies and all of that. We're very happy to do it, and we're really glad that we've put out the Green Book, that we've put out different publications. We've got our manual. We are city builders. We're very proud of that, but it's work. It's work. It's definitely work. And we would like to put out as much material as we possibly can. But there you go. There you go. One book that I'm sure many of you have heard of is "Getting Rich Without Capitalism: America's Way Out." Right. This is a book I wrote. It was a compilation of a lot of articles I wrote. With an introduction. I mean, people enjoy this. People enjoy this stuff. So, there you go. There you go. Alrighty. The U.S. military in Ghana has taken over one in three terminals of the airport. Not surprising. One thing that surprised me. So when I was coming back from the Middle East, I remember this because I had to do it a number of times. I was coming back from the Middle East. I was coming back from the United Arab Emirates, and I remember that I had to go through customs in the United Arab Emirates. And that is a thing that happens. And in the Middle East, they do this. They do this in Britain. They do this in a number of countries where instead of going through customs in the United States when you get back, you go through customs in the country before boarding the plane. On top of that, the U.S. military operates all over the African continent. I mean, AFRICOM, there's a huge amount of U.S. military expansion in Africa. It's largely a response to China's growing presence there, right? And you remember Bring Back Our Girls, right? That was a huge mobilization, talking about the horrors of the Boko Haram terrorist groups, but using that to justify the presence of U.S. troops in Africa. Obama and Michelle Obama, Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, they did this whole thing, Bring Back Our Girls. Well, it was a public relations campaign to lay the case, to build the case for, U.S. troops in Africa. You remember Coney 2012, right? You remember that? That was a whole movie that came out, Invisible Children, Coney 2012, and it was largely debunked. It was a debunked piece, but it was used to justify. It was a whole social media campaign used to justify the referendum for expropriation of real estate in Berlin, a victory for socialism. Berlin real estate. All right. Yeah. I mean, the U.S. military presence in Africa is constantly growing because China is building roads and building highways and raising people out of poverty. The United States is threatened by this. Right? The USA wants Africa underdeveloped as a captive market. China wants Africa to prosper and to become stronger, so China has more of an economy to trade with. There are diametrically opposed interests. The only overseas Chinese military base is in Africa. It's in Djibouti. The United States has military bases all over Africa and all over the world. There's over 800 U.S. military bases around the world. So there you go. All right. The European Union and revolutionary movements in Europe. Well, the European Union was something that Trotsky proposed, right? He proposed the United States of Europe. The United States of Europe. And it was proposed by Trotsky, the United States of Europe. They're going to build the United States of Europe. Lenin opposed it. He said unifying the imperialist powers of Europe would not be a good thing for the global working class. It would strengthen imperialism. And the European Union has been bad for workers. It has impeded workers' protections. It has created a situation where the capitalists are free to roam throughout Europe. It's been bad for the labor unions. Opposing the European Union is something that genuine communists have done all along. Just so happens that, Brexit in the UK, there was a lot of anti-Islamic, anti-immigrant sentiment. But at the end of the day, I would have voted for Brexit because Brexit, the European Union is still bad, right? As Chaya says in the chat, it's a free trade agreement. Now, revolutionary movements in Europe, again, solidarity. I am not familiar with Brian Berletic. I am not familiar with him, but thanks for asking. Not familiar with his work. So there you go. Pending government shutdown. Are they doing this again? Are they doing this again? Yawn. I mean, this is a great example of the incompetence of the U.S. society. They doing this again, really? Government shutdown. Oh boy. Government shutdown. Give me a break. This is the politics of capitalism in decay. All right. Berlin real estate. I don't know anything about that. I'm sorry. I don't know anything about that. I have not been following local politics in Berlin real estate. I have not been following that issue. I don't follow German politics as well as I should. I don't know anything about that. But folks, my grandpa says City Builders and Vandals is a very good book and was pleasantly surprised at how much he agrees with your views, says Dylan Smow. Well, that's really great to hear because your grandfather was a really great man. The more I read about your grandfather, you gave me a book about your grandfather. He sounds like a really great man. And I'm really moved to hear that. I'm really, really moved to hear that. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. I'm moved to hear that, and I appreciate it. From the bottom of my heart, I appreciate it. And City Builders and Vandals in Our Age, the opening essay of which is published, here in We Are City Builders, the manual. I'm really, really moved to hear that. Thank you very much, Dylan. That means the world to me. And thank you for that gift of a book. Your grandfather was a brilliant man, a dynamic man who changed history. Thank you very much. And folks, it looks like I'm going to call it a night here. We don't seem to have any more super chats. So I guess we'll end it. We'll probably do this again tomorrow. Quick announcement. For those of you that are members of the Patreon community, we're going to be having our patrons only stream on Friday. On Friday, we have a patrons only stream. It'll be in the evening. Patrons only stream on Friday. So if you want to be part of that, I would sign up and become part of the Patreon community. If you don't want to be part of it, I mean, it's patrons only. So there you go. But yes, so if you're part of the patrons community, I'll be sending out the link to those on Patreon soon. So there you go. All right, folks. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night.